Belarusian border is 35 kilometers away and the Lithuanian border is around 25 kilometers away. Where are we? Daugavpils!
Daugavpils has been associated with the Daugava route, one of the most important commercial passages in the Orthodox world already in the Middle Age. The crusading Livonian order recognized its strategic position as it entered the Balticon territory and constructed an impressive stone fortress upon this picturesque woodland in the middle of the 13th century. Through the history, this town has attracted many ambitious conquerors' attentions.
Daugavpils today is predominantly a Russian town, and there are Russian people everywhere, and many of the restaurants have menus in both Latvian, of course Russian and English, and if you lost yourself in the city, you will soon find a nice babushka who wants to talk with you, and doesn't matter, she doesn't understand you, she talks, extremely friendly and nice.
When Latvia belonged to the Soviet Union, the central government from Moscow relocated many healthy workers from the Russian heartland to here, working in, among others, the locomotive repair industries, electric tools factories, or chemical enterprises. Over 50% of residents today are Russians, making Russian the most important second language. Nevertheless, many tourists from the West come to this town to learn how its recent history shaped a very original mind in the 20th century.
One of the most brilliant expressionist painter, Rothko, was a native Daugavpils. His family migrated to the United States when he was only 11 years old, and today he in Daugavpils is the only place where you can see the original Rothko paintings in the entire Europe. Just follow us and enjoy his idea of feelings, sorrows, and most of all, the melancholic idea of Diaspora.
In his childhood, he was known as Marcus Rothkovich for his family and friends in Dvinsk, when Daugavpils belonged to this pale settlement. Already at a very young age, Mr. Rothko believed that the total freedom of expression is the most important step towards any means of artistic progression. Many of his most celebrated paintings provoke the most intimate emotions and spiritual revelations within the spectators.
I have seen some of his paintings like 1,000 times in the textbook before. The feeling of really seeing the reproduction of his art is so overwhelming. I could hardly find a suitable word to describe the intense feelings it triggers in my heart. I am usually really good with words, but at this moment, I just don't know what that is. The pale blue color gives both a sense of hope, even a sense of religious revelation, but at the same time, there's so much tragic feelings around it, as if the entire illusion of being in heaven is framed with the kind of shame which you often feel when you are dreaming of something really adorable whilst you're going through some really life crisis.
Feeling of being an immigrant upon a new world who still wears his time-stained suit from the old homeland whilst trying to find a safe haven amongst people who speak a completely foreign language is a difficult circumstance. For Mr. Rothko, the feeling of loneliness amongst people who have very limited understanding about his plight or the impression of being an alien in a familiar physical environment is somehow his core artistic inspirations. He once said, "You have got sadness in you, I have got sadness in me, and my work of art are places where two sadnesses can meet."
When Mark Rothko was a child, most Jews lived outside the city center in the rather simple suburbs to Daugavpils. Nevertheless, their life was filled with aspirations of a new paradise which they would be able to create with resilience, and most of all, with their very original thoughts.
The destitute Yiddish-speaking Jews arrived in Dvinsk when this town was an active trading center in the Russian Empire. Historically, most Jews lived mainly in the Altstadt, Plan, and Plaza districts. In Rothko's time, many Jews made their living from commerce and provisioning the army. A large percentage of Jews work in factories which are established by the Jewish entrepreneurs. The Jewish community was somehow a self-sustained community and maintained a well-developed system of welfare and relief organizations, including a hospital, a society for visiting the sick and invalid, a soup kitchen, and a home for the elder. The Jewish education institutes were often inspired by both the Haskalah movement and the traditional Hedom, Talmud Torah, and the Eastern European yeshivas. Although most young people were enrolled in the Jewish liberal arts schools, learning both Yiddish language and Jewish culture in a general sense, many Jewish children also attended local secondary schools.
This is the place where Mark Rothko spent his childhood, and amongst people who lived here, they were Orthodox believers, they were the old believers, they were Catholics, and most of all, they were a huge group of greedy and tenacious Ashkenazi Jews. They taught him the importance of the a good work ethic. Moreover, they gave him an incentive to fight for his own identity.
The Dvinsk movement amongst Jewish people from all fractions was very popular, especially after the First World War commenced. There were a number of Dvinsk socialist parties, many of which had a huge number of followers amongst the factory workers and highly educated academics, who had studied the history of the Jewish diaspora closely and saw a Jewish nation was the only path towards a peaceful and stable future for both themselves and their families.
This is Solesiela. Before the first program, this was the most densely populated district for the Jewish people.
Jewish people had a great reputation as reliable tailors and shoemakers amongst the local Gentiles. The entrepreneurs often bought buttons, leather, and shoelaces from other Jewish-owned factories and tanneries. Dvinsk was also an important center for Jewish culture and produced a few of the most influential rabbis of the entire Baltic region.
Once upon a time, the Jewish population made up to 50% of the entire population in this town. And before the outbreak of the Second World War, there were altogether 40 synagogues. Between the First World War and the Second World War and the liberation of Latvia, the number of Jews decreased all the time. Some of them were deported to Siberia by the Soviet government. Others were killed by the Holocaust. And today,
the entire Jewish population in this town is less than 100 people. They're still Ashkenazis, they still say their prayers when reading Torah, and they still argue with each other and using Talmud as their most important literature.
When looking at old photos, knowing the fact that most Jews from all walks of life left the soil which nourished them from their childhood with the gunfire in the 40s, the beads of tears came down quietly despite we did our best to ignore the burning sensations our eyes experienced. What we could not bear is not only the chilling history, rather the new round of white nationalist movement that has again emerged in the New World. It is never wise to base an important decision upon an oversimplified picture of a society which contains both the complex social contradictions and economic conflicts. In the name of common sense, can we really liberate our minds from our own biased ideas of the world? Obviously not. The question is, which group is going to perish in the next round of Holocaust?